I am Malala, chapter 13, The Diary of Gul Makai. It was during one of those dark days that my father received a call from his friend Abdul Hai Kakar, a BBC radio correspondent based in Peshawar. He was looking for a female teacher or a schoolgirl to write a diary about life under the Taliban. He wanted to show the human side of the catastrophe in Swat. Initially, Madame Marian's younger sister Ayesha agreed, but her father found out and refused his permission, saying it was too risky. When I overheard my father talking about this, I said, "Why not me? I want people to know what was happening. Education is our right," I said. Just as it was our right to sing and play, Islam has given us this right and say that every girl and boy should go to school. The Quran says we should seek knowledge, study hard, and learn the mysteries of our world. I had never written a diary before and didn't know how to begin. Although we had a computer, there were frequent power cuts and few places had internet access. So Hai Kakar would call me in the evening on my mother's mobile. He used his wife's phone to protect us, as he said his phone was bugged by the intelligence services. He would guide me, asking me questions about my day and asking me to tell him small anecdotes or talk about my dreams. We would speak for half an hour or 45 minutes in Urdu, and he wanted the voice to be as authentic as possible. Then he wrote up my words, and once a week they would appear on BBC Urdu website. He told me about Anne Frank, a 13-year-old Jewish girl who hid from the Nazis with her family in Amsterdam during the war. He told me she kept a diary about their lives, all crammed together, about how they spent their days and about her own feelings. It was very sad, as in the end the family was betrayed and arrested, and Annie died in a concentration camp when she was only 15. Later her diary was published and is very powerful record. Hai Kakar told me it could be dangerous to use my real name and gave me a pseudonym called Gul Makai, which means cornflower, and is the name of the heroine in Pashtun folk story. It's a kind of Romeo and Juliet story in which Gul Makai and Musa Khan meet at school and fall in love, but they are from different tribes, so their love causes a war. However, unlike Shakespeare play, their story doesn't end in tragedy. Gul Makai uses the Holy Quran to teach her elders that war is bad, and then eventually stop fighting and allow the lovers to unite. My first diary entry appeared on 3rd January 2009 under the heading, "I am afraid." I had a terrible dream last night filled with military helicopters and Taliban. I have had such dreams since the launch of the military operation in Swat. I wrote about being afraid to go to school because of the Taliban edict and looking over my shoulder all the time. I also described something that happened on my way home from school. I heard a man behind me saying, "I will kill you." I quickened my pace, and after a while I looked back to see if he was following me. To my huge relief, I saw he was speaking on his phone. He must have been talking to someone else. It was thrilling to see my words on the website. I was a bit shy to start with, but after a while I got to know the kind of things Hai Kakar wanted me to talk about and became more confident. He liked personal feelings and what he called my pungent sentences, and also mix of everyday family life with the terror of the Taliban. I wrote a lot about school, as that was the center of our lives. I love my royal blue school uniform, but we were advised to wear plain clothes instead and hide our books under our shawls. One extract was called, "Do not wear colorful clothes." In it I write, "I was getting ready for school one day and was about to put on my uniform when I remembered the advice of our principal, so that day I decided to wear my favorite pink dress." I also wrote about the burqa. When you are very young, you love the burqa because it's great for dressing up. But when you are made to wear it, that's a different matter. Also, it makes walking difficult. One of my diary entries was about an incident that happened when I was out shopping with my mother and cousin in the China Bazaar. There were heard There we heard gossip that one day a woman was wearing a shuttlecock burqa and fell over. When a man tried to help her, she refused and said, "Don't help me, brother, as this will bring immense pleasure to Fazlaullah." When we entered the shop, we were going to, the shopkeeper laughed and told us he got scared thinking we might be suicide bombers, as many suicide bombers wore the burqa. At school, people started talking about the diary. One girl even printed it out and brought it to brought it in to show my father. "It's very good," he said with a knowing smile. "I want to tell people it was me, but the BBC correspondent had told me not to, as it could be dangerous. I didn't see why, as I was a child and who would attack a child, but some of my friends recognized incidents in it, and I almost gave the game away in one entry when I said, 'My mother liked my pen name Gul Makai,' and joked to my father we should change my name. I also like the name because my real name means grief-stricken." The diary of Gul Makai received attention further afield. Some newspapers printed extracts. Then BBC even made a recording of it using another girl's voice. And I began to see that the pen and the words that came from it can be much more powerful than machine guns, tanks, or helicopters. We were learning how to struggle, and we were learning how powerful we are when we speak. Some of our teachers stopped coming to school. One said he had been ordered by Mullah Fazlaullah to help build his center in Imam Derry. Another said he had seen a beheaded corpse on the way in and could no longer risk his life to teach. Many people were scared. Our neighbors said that the Taliban were instructing people to make it known to the mosque if their daughters were unmarried so that they could marry off, probably to militants. By the start of January 2009, there were only 10 girls in my class, when once there had been 27. Many of my friends had left the valley so they could be educated in Peshawar, but my father insisted we would not leave. "SWAT has given us so much. In these tough days, we must be strong for our valley," he said. One night, we all went for dinner at the house of my father's friend, Dr. Afzal, who runs a hospital. After dinner, when the doctor was driving us home, we saw masked Taliban on both sides of the road carrying guns. We were terrified. Dr. Afzal's hospital was in an area that had been taken over by the Taliban. The constant gunfire and the curfews had made it impossible for the hospital to function, so he had moved it to Barikot. There had been an outcry, and the Taliban spokesman, Muslim Khan, had called on the doctor to reopen it. He had asked for my father's advice. My father told him, "Don't accept good things from bad people. A hospital protected by Taliban was not a good idea," so he refused. Dr. Afzal did not live far from us. So once we were safely home, my father insisted on going back with him in case he was targeted by the Taliban. As he and my father drove back, Dr. Afzal asked me, "What name shall we give if they stop us?" They were both nervous. "You are Dr. Afzal and I am Ziauddin Yusufzai," replied my father. "These bloody people, we haven't done anything wrong. Why should we change our names? That's what criminals do." Fortunately, the Taliban had disappeared. We all breathed a big sigh of relief when my father phoned to say they were safe. I didn't want to give in either, but the Taliban's deadline was drawing closer. Girls had to stop going to school. How could they stop more than 50,000 girls from going to school in the 21st century? I kept hoping something would happen and the schools would remain open, but finally the deadline was upon us. We were determined that the Kushal school bell would be the last to stop ringing. Madam Mariam had even got married so she could stay in Swat. Her family had moved to Karachi to get away from the conflict, and as a woman, she did not live alone. Wednesday, 14 January, was a day my school closed, and when I woke up in the morning, I saw TV cameras in my bedroom. A Pakistani journalist called Irfan Ashraf was following me around, even as I said in my prayers and brushed my teeth. I could tell my father was in a bad mood. His friend Fazal Molla had persuaded him to participate in a documentary for the New York Times website to show the world what was happening to us. A few weeks before, we had met the American video journalist Adam Ellick in Peshawar. It was a funny meeting as he conducted a long interview with my father in English and I didn't say a word. Then he asked if he could talk to me and began asking questions using Irfan as an interpreter. After about 10 minutes of this, he realized from my facial expression that I could understand him perfectly. You speak English? He asked me. Yes, I was just saying there is a fear in my heart, I replied. Adam was astonished. What's wrong with you people? He asked Irfan and my father. She speaks better English than the rest of you, and you are translating for her? We all laughed. The original idea for the documentary had been to follow my father on the last day of school, but at the end of the meeting, Irfan asked me, what would you do if there comes a day when you can't go back to your valley and school? I said this wouldn't happen. Then he insisted and I started to weep. I think it was then that Adam decided he should focus on me. Adam could not come to Swat because it was too dangerous for foreigners. When Irfan and a cameraman arrived in Mingora, our uncle who was staying with us said over and over that it was too risky to have cameras in our house. My father also kept telling him to hide the cameras. But they had come a long way and it's hard for us as Pashtuns to refuse hospitality. Besides, my father knew this could be our megaphone to the outside world. His friend had told him it would make far more impact than him roaming from pillar to post. I had done a lot of television interviews and enjoyed speaking into the microphone so much that my friends would tease me. But I had never done anything like this. Be natural, Irfan told me. That wasn't easy with a camera trained on me everywhere I went, even as I brushed my teeth. I showed them the uniform I couldn't wear and told them I was scared that if the Taliban caught me going to school, they would throw acid in my face, and as they had to girls in Afghanistan. We had a special assembly that final morning, but it was hard to hear with the noise of helicopters overhead. Some of us spoke out against what was happening in our valley. The bell rang for the very last time, and then Madam Mariam announced it was winter vacation. But unlike in other years, no date was announced for the start of next term. Even so, some teachers still gave us homework. In the yard, I hugged all my friends. I looked at the honors board and wondered if my name would appear on it again. Exams were due in March, but how could they take place? Coming first didn't matter if you couldn't study at all. When someone takes away your pens, you realize quite how important education is. Before I closed the school door, I looked back as if it were the last time I would ever be at school. That's the closing shot in one part of the documentary. In reality, I went back inside. My friends, I didn't want that day to end, so we decided to stay on for a while longer. We went to primary school where there were more space to run around and play cops and robbers. Then we played Mango Mango, when you make a circle and sing. Then when the song stops, everyone has to freeze. Anyone who moves or laughs is out. We came home from school late that day. Usually we leave at 1 p.m., but that day we stayed till 3. Before we left, Moniba and I had an argument over something so silly I can't remember what it was. Our friends couldn't believe it. You two always argue when there's an important occasion, they said. It wasn't a good way to leave things. I told the documentary makers, they cannot stop me. I will get my education if it's at home, school, or somewhere else. This is our request to the world, to save our schools, save our Pakistan, save our Swat. When I got home, I cried and cried. I didn't want to stop learning. I was only 11 years old, but I felt as though I had lost everything. I had told everyone in my class that the Taliban wouldn't go through with it. They are just like our politicians. They talk the talk, but they won't do anything, I had said. But then they went ahead and closed our school and I felt embarrassed. I couldn't control myself. I was crying. My mother was crying, but my father insisted, you will go to school. For him, the closing of the schools also meant the loss of business. The boys' school would reopen after the winter holidays, but the loss of the girls' school represented a big cut in our income. More than half the school fees were overdue, and my father spent the last day chasing money to pay the rent, the utility bills, and the teachers' salaries. That night, the air was full of artillery fire, and I woke up 3 times. The next morning, everything had changed. I began to think that maybe I should go to Peshawar or abroad, or maybe I could ask our teachers to form a secret school in our home, as home Afghans had done during Taliban rule. Afterward, I went on as many radio and TV channels as possible. They, they can't stop us going to school, but they can't stop us learning, I said. I sounded hopeful, but in my heart I was worried. My father and I went to Peshawar and visited lots of places to tell people what was happening. I spoke of the irony of the Taliban wanting female teachers and doctors for women, yet not letting girls to go to school to qualify for these jobs. One Muslim Khan Once Muslim Khan had said girls should not go to school and learn Western ways. This from a man who had lived so long in America? He insisted he would have his own education system. What would Muslim Khan use instead of the stethoscope and thermometer? My father asked, are there any Eastern instruments which will treat the sick? The Taliban is against education because they think that when a child reads a book or learns English or studies science, he or she will become westernized. But I said, education is education. We should learn everything and then choose which path to follow. Education is neither Eastern nor Western, it is human. My mother used to tell me to hide my face when I spoke to media because at my age I should be in parda and she was afraid for my safety. But she never banned me from doing anything. It was a time of horror and fear. People often said Taliban might kill my father, but not me. Malala is a child, they would say. And even the Taliban don't kill children. But my grandmother wasn't so sure. Whenever my grandmother saw me speaking on television or leaving the house, she would pray, please God, make Malala like Benazir Bhutto, but do not give her Benazir's short life. After my school closed down, I continued to write the blog. 4 days after the ban on girls' school, 5 more were destroyed. I'm quite surprised, I wrote, because these schools had closed. So why did they also need to be destroyed? No one has gone to school following the Taliban's deadline. The army is doing nothing about it. They are sitting in their bunkers on top of the hills. They slaughter goats and eat with pleasure. I also wrote about people going to watch the floggings announced on Mullah FM and the fact that the army and the police were nowhere to be seen. One day we got a call from America from a student at Stanford University. Her name was Shiza Shahid and she came from Islamabad. She had seen the New York Times documentary Class Dismissed in Swat Valley and tracked us down. We saw then the power of media and she became a great support to us. My father was almost bursting with pride at how I came across on a documentary. Look at her, he told Adam Ellick. Don't you think she's meant for the skies? Father can be very embarrassing. Adam took us to Islamabad. It was the first time I had ever visited Islamabad, a beautiful place with nice white bungalows and broad roads, though it had none of natural beauty of Swat. We saw the Red Mosque where the siege had taken place, the wide Constitution Avenue leading to the white colonnaded building of the Parliament House and the Presidency, where Zardari now lived. General Musharraf was in exile in London. We went to shop where I bought school books and Adam bought me DVDs of American TV programs like Ugly Betty, which was about a girl with big braces and a big heart. I loved it and dreamed of one day going to New York and working on a magazine like her. We visited the Loch Wirtza Museum and it was a joy to celebrate our national heritage once again. Our own museum in Swat had closed. On the step outside, an old man was selling popcorn. He was Pashtun like us. And when my father asked if he was from Islamabad, he replied, do you think Islamabad can even belong to us Pashtuns? He said he came from Muhammad, one of the tribal areas, but had to flee because of military operation. I saw tears in my parents' eyes. Lots of buildings were surrounded by concrete blocks and there were checkpoints for incoming vehicles to guard against suicide bombs. When our bus hit a pothole on the way back, my brother Kushal, who had been asleep, jerked awake. Was that a bomb blast? He asked. This was a fear that filled our daily lives. Any small disturbance or noise could be a bomb or a gunfire. On our short trips, we forget about our troubles in SWAT, but we return to the threats and dangers as we entered our valley once again. Even so, SWAT was our home, and we were not ready to leave it. Back in Mingora, the first thing I saw when I opened my wardrobe was my uniform, school bag, and a geometry set. I felt so sad. The visit to Islamabad had been a lovely break, but this was my reality now.